Game 4. Let's try to break this down. So, before we get into all the stats and the history and what this means, Boston tying it up 2-2 now in the Eastern Conference Finals with Miami. The first thing I was kind of looking at is like, okay, now that Rob Williams is back, how does that change things? And how does it change things for Horford? But then Smart is out. Tyler Hero's also out for Miami. So there's just a lot of different things trying to figure this out. And these teams, it feels like last man up, especially here in the Eastern Conference. Okay, so the first play, I'm looking at how they're going to defend Bam, because we were wondering why Bam wasn't initiating more offense, why it wasn't more aggressive, run the offense through Bam a little bit more. They did that in Game 3. None of this should be surprising, but I always kind of like to see like little tone setters in the beginning of a game to see if something's different. And I thought that Al came all the way. They were running this right side two-man game thing, Lowry and Bam, and Horford came all the way out to meet Bam almost at the break. And then Lowry ran some action where you could think of Horford maybe helping off of Bam a little, because Bam's not going to hit that shot and hurt you from out there, but he didn't. He just stayed with them and kind of let Lowry do his own thing. And there was no like shading towards him. There was another play a few possessions later where PJ was coming through the lane, a little bit of a floater, and Horford had Bam to the baseline boxed out, but he never came up to help and contest. Part of that is knowing you have Rob, but I also feel like it was this part of the plan of just staying as attached to Bam as you can the entire time. So it's like, look, don't even help on drives, because if you do, then it's a lob back to him. So just stay with him. Let him know that you're there the entire time. So that was a small part of it. It's not the entire story of the game, which we'll get to. Another small thing that I really liked that Boston did, they had a two-man game that they're trying to run with Butler getting a switch into Pritchard, which we've seen multiple times in this series. It was on the left side, two-man. And what happened here, and I love when teams do this, is they switch into a bad matchup, but they have somebody else kind of cheating towards the bad switch going, let's switch it again. Sometimes they'll do this before in a different way, but they did it after the fact. And it's hard for Pritchard because then you have to run back to whoever was originally assigned to the guy that was helping you. In this case, I believe it was Grant Williams with PJ Tucker. PJ Tucker's all the way in the right corner. So Pritchard has to get back. But the way Grant just let PJ go to the other side of the basketball court, stayed kind of at the paint, and then was like, all right, you got switched Butler into Pritchard, but I'm kind of here. And everybody has to be on the same page. This is not easy because it's very easy. It's easy, but it's also even easier to screw it up. It's probably the best way to describe this. And so Pritchard runs back over the corner. Van Gundy's going nuts, being like, hey, they're doing some of this stuff. So, all right. The real story is it was 18-1, and Miami missed their first 14 shots, which is the worst start for a team shooting-wise in a playoff game in 25 years. So I don't know what the hell is going on in the playoffs. I wish I had a better explanation. I know some people think it's fatigue, 3-point variance, which, look, I don't think it's that bad. Game 3, as Bill and I discussed, that was about effort. It was also about turnovers, where some of the turnovers are because of effort and some of the turnovers were just Boston giving the ball away a ton. And even Boston got it back still to a 1-point game, despite how absurd that was. And Butler not playing the second half allows you to make that run and kind of get back into it. That never happened. There was some nice Oladipo stuff, which is like the only positive that you would take from this with Miami Heat, because historically, when you make your first shot at 3:21 of the first quarter, that means you're going to rank somewhere. So let's go over some of these numbers that I was looking at here. We'll give credit to some of this stuff. So it was the first playoff team without a field goal made in the first 7 minutes since 2009. Haralabob had something on their long two rate that was at 28%. Their season average was 14%. So this was going to register at one point. And I don't know what the final numbers were on the long two rate, but this is going to register as the second highest long two rate they had. Now, if you look at the shot chart in the first quarter for Miami, there's actually about 7 or 8 shots that are kind of restricted area, which I know the NBA, the way they track it, they find restricted area in, but like just outside of the restricted area, Miami didn't make any of those either. They didn't make anything. They didn't make anything. The Heat starting 5 scored 18 points total in Game 4. It's the fewest by a starting 5 in a playoff game since it was first tracked in 1971. So it's the worst starting 5 production in a playoff game since 71, and likely before that. That's just the first year they kept track of this stuff. Here's another stat from Sean Grande, voice of the Celtics on radio. The Celtics have 12 total losses since mid-January. Their record after that, they're 11-1 with a scoring differential of 17 points. But really what you should do is say it's 11-0 because the loss was against Toronto when they had 4 starters out. So the 11-1 numbers, taking out the Toronto game, Boston's winning the game after the loss by almost 19 points. These numbers are like, they're as bad as they are for Miami. Boston's had a tendency here to answer, and Tatum's been one of those guys as well. Tatum now is 4th in playoff scoring, and as bad as he was in Game 3, and he was bad, and we saw how bad he was in the middle of the series against Milwaukee, this is kind of what he does, and I think what a lot of the guys do that aren't Luka, aren't Steph, aren't Giannis, because I still wouldn't put Tatum necessarily in that category. I have another stat for you that speaks more to the margin of victory in general. Over the last 17 playoff games, I saw this on Twitter. I don't know who had it. Sorry, a million guys had it. The last 17 playoff games, the margin of victory has been about 20 points, so 19.8. There's been a total in 17 playoff games, 7 clutch minutes played. 7 clutch minutes played in the last 17 playoff games. So there could be a bigger topic here about what's going on and what all this means, and does the NBA need to fix it? You know, I will argue all the time, you know, sometimes something just happens. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a thing. Maybe this is just a really weird historical thing where there are these swings left and right that we can't really explain. Golden State, who's probably everybody's favorite right now to win an NBA title, is up 3-0 on a Dallas team that we weren't sure about. Felt good about after a miraculous Phoenix win, but Golden State was down 55 points at Memphis in their last playoff loss. They've won 4 straight since then. So you're like, wait, is an NBA title team going to lose by 55 points against Memphis without Ja? Is that the profile of an NBA champ? That didn't make a ton of sense. So as I've said throughout, and I certainly can with this series, you know, when someone wins, I can talk myself into it. And when someone loses, I can talk myself out of it, right? When Phoenix is rolling, you're like, look at all this depth. Look at all the guys they have, all these different options. They have size everywhere. They have Bridges defensively. They have Booker, who plays well off of Paul. Paul knows when to go and when not to go. Ayton is a big that you can keep on the floor to close the game. And instead, you're like, yeah, Bridges didn't really do a ton of offense on his own. Booker missed a million shots. Paul fell apart at the end of it. Do you really want to re-sign Ayton? You know, that's how quickly the conversation changes. It's the same thing with Golden State. Off the Memphis series, you're like, why was it 6 games without Ja? You know, what's going on with Clay? Is Draymond just going to be ignored so much by Dallas defensively he actually becomes more of a liability? Will Looney play in this matchup against a smaller team that wants to go small all the time? And Looney's been terrific, especially when you go back to looking at what Looney did in Game 2. It's the same thing with Boston in this series. I can do both sides of this. I could go, well, look, Marcus Smart didn't play in Game 1. They switched in Pritchard a million times. He played 30 minutes. He comes back Game 2. That's the Celtics. That's what you'd expect to see. It's 1-1. I think, as I've said throughout, I think Boston's a better basketball team. And then Game 3 happens, and you go, wow, all right, you know, Miami's really tough. They're really tough. And they are. It's a bunch of really tough guys. They also might be a bunch of really tough guys that are hurt. I don't think Butler looks the same. He was a mess. Hero doesn't play, which for a team that needs offense, for a team that's biggest question mark about winning an NBA title is, will they have enough offense to carry them? And then you take Hero out of the mix, and then PJ Tucker apparently is dealing with something too. And then I start going, well, you know, Boston just handed them the basketball about half of those 25 turnovers, and they still got it to 1. So why can't they come back and win this thing? And they didn't have Rob Williams. So yeah, after 4 games, I'm sitting here going, yeah, they turned it over a ton in Game 3. And even without Smart, they had Rob back, and that changes the things with Bam. They didn't, you know, whatever. I think Miami's hurting big time, and I would be surprised if they came back and won this series in the last 3. But this is the story of what this series is. Another little note here. Speaking of guys being hurt, because everybody's kind of hurt, and it's Ty Lue's old line when they'd ask him about injury updates, he'd say, everybody's hurt, everybody's playing. There's one last thing. It's what I talked about months ago about the high usage rate in the history in the playoffs and how bad it is. It's overwhelmingly bad. Not impossible, but overwhelmingly bad. The last 20 years, the top usage guys. The top 6 usage players in the NBA for the playoffs. The top 6 usage players in the playoffs right now, it's Luka, it's Giannis, It's Jokic, it's Mitchell, it's Durant, it's Ja. The top 6, when Doncic gets eliminated here, are all going to be home. I'm not sure what Miami can do to be better other than hope Boston turns it over a million times in Game 5 and just shoots it poorly, and the energy will be there for the Heat. It's obviously not the same crowd as Boston. I don't know that anybody would debate that one at this point. Could they go small? Could they throw more Victor Oladipo at them? They could try that. They try to go small in some of the lineups, and I thought that Boston was just so big at one point. They just had all their big guys out there against the small lineup, and I thought there was a lot of rebounding issues that the Miami Heat had in that game. So we'll see what happens. But overall, the swings and the blowouts, and obviously from just a product standpoint, the lack of close last couple minutes, less reviews though. It's a little disappointing, but it's also, it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain how teams can look so opposite in 48 hours.